My lifestyle working in the city of London was one of just living for the weekend, I suppose. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. You spent all your time focused on making money and chasing bonuses, and that's just not what I was wanting to do for my life. ISIS developed a very sophisticated propaganda department that, for the first time, shocked the world in its utter barbarity. Just think, these brainless, mindless, evil people in the Middle East could reach into everyone's homes in Britain, in America, literally on their TV screens, in the newspapers, right up to the President of the United States, and they could shock them and discuss them and force a reaction from them. And the way they were doing that was they were executing people in the most humiliating and barbarous ways. Humanitarians, people who cared and loved for Syria. These weren't politicians, they weren't soldiers, they were ordinary people, brave people, like David Henning and etc. etc. So I learned about what was going on in the Middle East. I was obsessed by this growing crisis. And when Mosul fell, the second largest city in Iraq, more than 1 million people fell to this terror group. And there was word that ISIS could grow to Lebanon, it could grow to Turkey and Jordan. And suddenly I realized that this crisis wasn't going away. And more importantly, because of war fatigue, because Britain and America just didn't want to militarily intervene, no one was going to do anything about it. So I decided to pack up my bags, quit my job, and go out to fight ISIS. Because everyone remembers where they were when Mosul fell and when they first heard of ISIS. ISIS were so unbelievably brutal that they reveled in the pain and anguish that they were inflicting on the world. Everyone saw the images of Sinjar Mountain, with thousands of Yazidis trapped on the mountain, and then the horrendous images afterwards of these girls being sold into sexual slavery, some as young as sort of 3 years old. And I was so angry watching this. We saw this horrendous thing happening, the Islamic State ripping the region apart, but we had no idea who was going to fight ISIS, who was going to bring stability to the region. And it was only through my research that I discovered the Kurds and what would later become the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. The decision to go out to Syria happened pretty quickly because obviously I was disgusted and obsessed by what was going on in the region. And but I had to first almost dismantle my old life, which was a huge decision to make because it meant giving up this fantastic job that I'd lined up with a major bank in the UK. And it also meant leaving a partner. I had a partner at the time who was obviously very upset when we did eventually break up before I went out. And I had to give up my flat and everything else. One of the regrets I do have is the fact that I was having to lie to my family because I didn't want to tell them that I was going to go out and I was going to do all the things that I would later do. It was basically throwing myself in the deep end because I was going to this brutal fight, but that, as far as I was concerned, was a political one. So for the first couple of months in Syria, it was actually pretty boring. Not a huge amount was happening. The front line hadn't moved in about 3 or 4 months. We spent 2 months training, waiting for something to happen. And then one day we were ordered to move. We actually crossed into Iraq, right up to Sinjar Mountain, and we skirted the mountain and went around all the minefields that the Islamic State had laid in our area of Syria. And by doing that, we took the Islamic State by surprise. And we chased them all the way back to a town called Til Nazri. And it was there for the first time I came under fire. It's slightly disorientating and just incredibly strange to hear the crack of bullets over your head for the first time. Also to hear and to see the Islamic State's use of mortars. It was just horrendous. Yet at the same time, strangely fulfilling because we not only took Til Hamas almost without any loss. I think we lost about 5 or 6 guys in the entire time that we were on that operation. But then by the time we swang south, because the Islamic State began counterattacking in a place called Til Nazri, and there was this horrendous incident where the Islamic State, led by a guy called, I think his name was Omar the Chechen, we were fighting from village to village, just chasing the Islamic State fighters out. And one village would be a Christian one, the next would be Yazidi, then there would be a mosque, an Arab village. These people, these communities live so close together. It was also the first experience I had of loss. When one assault on a Christian village, I was on top of this roof just shooting at the Islamic State positions in the town. And I saw some of our guys pushing forward, and several of them were shot. It was just, yeah, my first experience of what it's like to be shot at, what it's like to engage, and what it's like to lose. The story of my time in Syria is really the story of the defeat of the Islamic State, essentially, because I was there for 3 years. I began seeing American and British troops on the ground. These people were facilitators. There were special forces calling in airstrikes and engaging directly with the Islamic State to defeat them. Eventually, we got to the cities where things really began to change, where we began fighting in the cities of places like Manbij and then eventually Raqqa, which was their capital. And we began to lose hundreds and hundreds of our guys on a weekly basis. By the end of the fight, 12,000 Kurds would die fighting against the Islamic State. The Islamic State itself would lose like 100,000 fighters. And when they were finally defeated, of course, there are more than 100,000 prisoners, even to this day, sitting in camps, the most famous in Britain being Shamima Begum. Raqqa was absolutely horrendous. It was a city that became almost completely destroyed by the end of the operation to liberate it. Raqqa was being held by a lot of fanatical supporters that were determined to keep it at whatever cost. They were willing to die for it because, as I said, the Islamic State had two capitals, Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq. Mosul became their sort of cultural and sort of political center, whereas Raqqa was seen as their military capital. It was where their most battle-hardened troops were. It was the area that sort of drew, I suppose, the most amount of loyalty from certain tribes. So defending it was absolutely vital to them. Yet at the same time, opposing them was 20,000 Kurdish fighters supported by the might of the coalition, by British and American and French aircraft that were being called in by people on the ground. As the months progressed, we pushed deeper and deeper into the city, and it was horrendous. It was street to street, it was alleyway to alleyway, stairwell to stairwell, and the city around us was slowly being destroyed. Every day there was car bombs that would race towards our positions and would give us just a couple of minutes to try and destroy them. And the amount of close calls we had where a car bomb would be coming down the street, and just in time an American F-16 or whatever would come in and blow it up. But that's really where my story ends, because after the Battle of Raqqa, where I spent 6 months fighting in the streets of this city, which was the home of the Islamic State, their military capital, this was where all those prisoners, all those British humanitarians and journalists were executed. I felt a sense of sort of completion, that I had done in those 3 years what I'd set out to do largely, and that was to advocate for the Kurds, to fight back against them, and to show them that they weren't alone.